Okay, hello, welcome to Tales from the House. Today, April the 13th, and I've got some nice treats in store for you today. Mind-bending stuff, as usual, things on the edge of your memory that you think you know, or maybe didn't at all, or maybe knew very well. In any case, I hope they're all intriguing for you as we get ever more dishevelled and in need of a barber with each day that lockdown goes on. Let us get on. Three events for you today on April the 13th in history. Let's start with the 100 Years' War and April the 13th, 1360. Now, the 100 Years' War, let us remember, was not 100 years. It went on for 116 years. It just seems like an incredible amount of time, I know, and why did they call it that when it isn't that? Well, it's about England and France trying to decide who has the right to rule France. And you might think that's an obvious question in this day and age, but England had a very good claim to the throne. For well over 100 years, through the marriage, they had owned half of France themselves. And so this is what the 100 Years' War is all about. And as you can guess by the name, it's an epic contest and goes on in different stages for a great deal of time. But we're interested in the end of the first stage. It had begun in 1337, went on till 1453, but the first stage ends today in 1360. And I want to tell you why, because it's quite an incredible event. First of all, let's have a look at the two leaders of the two sides. We've got, and I just need a moment to present my screen to you, so that you can see all the things I want to show you that really make my talking much more interesting instead of looking at me. Right, here we have Edward III, who is the leader of English troops through the beginning of the 100 Years' War until about 1377. And Edward is ably assisted by his son, Edward, more commonly known as the Black Prince. This is a statue of him in Leeds. I've no idea why, because he has nothing to do with Leeds and never ever went there. Still, it's a rather magnificent statue of the Black Prince. Why on earth is he called the Black Prince? Well, there are lots of rumours. The most common English one is that he wore black, dulled armour into battle, or it might be that this was his shield, the shield of peace. Bit of a joke, given how warfaring he was, which was black. And it's also from the Black Prince that we get the Prince of Wales feathers, because as son of the king, he was the Prince of Wales, hence the Ich dien, I serve. The French would probably tell you that, in fact, he's called the Black Prince because he was so incredibly brutal in the 100 Years' War, the early part of it, and had significant amounts of victory against the French, destroying towns left, right, and centre. And so the black refers to his, hard, violent approach. Still, the Black Prince. Let's take the black armour because I'm British and I'd like to think well of them. In any case, on the opposing side, we had King John of France, who by 1360 is losing control. England have won all major conflicts and are pressing at the gates of Paris, and he is about to be captured. But this would not be for the first time. 4 years earlier, in 1356, he had been captured at the Battle of Poitiers, and he had been ransomed back to the French government and nobility for 2 million écus, the highest currency in France at that point in time. John was disgusted at this ransom price and demanded that his own ransom be doubled to 4 million écus because he was so important and worth that. Bizarre. He made his own country and nobility pay double the price for ransoming. He refused to return for such a cheap price. Incredible. So, not the best leader. In any case, these are the two belligerents, and by 1360, they're at the gates of Paris, but Paris can't be taken. So, the English decide to move the siege on and head, I think, northwest a bit to the town of Chartres, which has a magnificent cathedral and is a place of pilgrimage. They arrive at Chartres on the 13th of April, 1360, today. It was an Easter Monday as well. And they lay siege. And that evening, the town is not going to hold out for more than a day or two. It just isn't capable of defending itself. So there should be an easy victory on the way home here. But that evening, a hailstorm of such magnitude, the likes of which we've probably not seen before, hit the English camp outside Chartres. It only lasted half an hour, but the hailstones were huge. And I mean huge. I mean bigger than this, probably, given the devastation about what happened, because it did this kind of damage. So we must be talking huge. Yeah, no, that's not real. Kind of fun, though. It destroyed in half an hour. 1,000 English soldiers were killed by the hailstones. 6,000 English horses were killed. And Edward III himself, taking this as a sign from God that he was in the wrong, got off his horse in the middle of the night, faced Chartres, prayed to God for forgiveness, and swore that he would make peace at first light in the morning and go home. The next morning, the French arrived from Paris offering to negotiate terms, and to their delight, Edward accepted whatever terms were immediately considered and promptly went home. So today, Black Monday, as the English army called it for several hundred years, and Shakespeare refers to it in his play, Black Monday, Easter Monday, April the 13th, 1360, ended the first phase of the 100 Years' War with the most enormous hailstones storm that obliterated the English army. So you be careful today when it gets to this evening. Keep an eye. Don't go out tonight, even if you take a light. There we are. Moving on then to our next event today, which is really quite bizarre. It's about MK Ultra, which was started by this man, Alan Dulles, in April 13th, 1953. Project MK Ultra. The MK, he's the director of the CIA at this point in time, by the way. The MK refers to the fact that technical staff within the CIA were going to be running this. And Ultra was simply borrowed from the famous Ultra team in British intelligence. British intelligence, secret intelligence in World War II was called Ultra. And they're the people who broke the Enigma code. And apart from being a rather cool name, it was very successful. So the Americans adopted Ultra for the name of their secret intelligence unit. So we have Project MK Ultra, started April 13th, 1953, by this man, director of the CIA, Alan Dulles. Now, what did it do? Well, Alan Dulles put this man in charge, Sidney Gottlieb, and the remit was to investigate mind control and truth drugs. You know, we're heading into strange territory. You know it's going to be like that, but I'm not kidding you. The Americans were worried that they were losing their dominance in the world. The Russians were catching up with nuclear technology. The Korean War was drawing to an end, and China had swung in on the side of Korea, and the war was effectively a draw. They had heard that captured spies and senior officers by the Russians and the Chinese were being subjected to truth drugs and mind control drugs, and they were concerned about all of this. So MK Ultra was the American effort to try and develop this and take a lead themselves. After all, the prospect of developing mind control would be magnificent. That would guarantee their dominance in the world, and this man was put in charge of it. You could have super soldiers. You could turn any spy to your side. You could even control leaders. And they tried to do all of these kinds of things. So how? Well, they decided they couldn't just, make this stuff. They had to test it on ordinary people, even those who were unsuspecting, to see if they could do it surreptitiously. Because world leaders are not going to say, yeah, I'll be mind controlled by the CIA. You're going to have to learn how to do this surreptitiously. So they practiced it surreptitiously on their own population throughout the 1950s and 60s. What on earth did Project MK Ultra do? Well, primarily they began, and here is the proposal. I don't know if you can see that. This is the proposal that was signed off by Alan Dulles in April 13th, 1953, to say, yes, go ahead and develop these mind control techniques. And one of the first things that Sidney Gottlieb did was say, well, here we are, Project 8. And you can see it there if I can zoom in a bit. I don't know if I can. We're going to have to stick with that. There we go. Project 8. MK Ultra, June 1953. This is the first sub-project, and there are lots of sub-projects, to use LSD as a form of mind control. How? Well, Gottlieb said, we're going to blow up a person's mind by seeing how much LSD that person can take. And then when the mind is a void and a vacuum, we can fill it with whatever motivation and instruction and methods of control that we want to. And this was how they thought they could make super soldiers and control world leaders, because you could apply this sort of stuff on pages of books or in their coffee. I don't know. It just became about application then. So this was what they decided to do, and it's quite remarkable. And there are all sorts of ways that they did it, because they had to test, remember, like I said, on ordinary members of the public. So they set up fake drug testing companies at universities and asked for students to come and volunteer under what would be normally safe conditions. But here, they just piled them with loads of different drugs to see what happened to them and recorded them in weekly meetings. I mean, some of the students might have liked it, but we're talking about massive amounts and frequency here. They even did it surreptitiously to their own CIA employees, causing the deaths of some of them. Famously, one of their own employees, who was a senior member of MKUltra development team, threw himself out of a hotel window. Although the suggestions are that maybe he was pushed because he was losing his mind because he had been given doses of LSD that were huge and unknowingly. And he was talking about quitting, going to the police, sectioning himself. And then he ends up as a jumper out of the 50th floor of a hotel room. Deeply suspicious, I know. Well, what else did they do? They tested it on mental patients, people who, were expendable. There's a case where they tested, they gave a mental patient LSD for 174 consecutive days to observe what it did to them. It's just incredible stuff. They would also, give it to members of the public and then interrogate members of the public and threaten them with a continuous interrogation and continuous LSD trips of increasing intensity unless they told them everything they knew and all the secrets they knew. And so this is what they're doing, trying to test this stuff. There's even one sub-project called Operation Midnight Climax, where the CIA set up a brothel. Because here you've got susceptible people coming to the brothel who don't want to tell anybody what they've been doing. So they set up this brothel, and they would give surreptitiously that the prostitutes would give the men coming in for services or whatever, they would give them large amounts of LSD. And then through one-way glass, the CIA were filming these people to see how they behaved, how their behavior changed and what they would do. And then they would grab them and interrogate them at some point later. The fact that this happened on a grand scale is incredible. And it wasn't just LSD they were testing all sorts of other drugs: temazepam, heroin, morphine, MDMA, mescaline, scopolamine. The list goes on and on. Different levels of alcohol, sodium pentothal, all sorts of stuff. I mean, I can see why this is the stuff of conspiracy theories. And at this point, you might be asking me, how on earth do we know all of this happened? Well, we know because of Watergate. The Watergate scandal was what brought down Nixon in his re-election campaign. Was what brought down Nixon's second term. And in the Watergate scandal, the fear across all government industries, in particular the CIA and FBI, about what might be exposed that they were doing, caused the overwhelming majority of MKUltra files to be destroyed. And they all were. The thing is that some obviously get misplaced, and people can't stop talking about it. You can't keep that sort of thing a secret forever. There have been people who subsequently said, I was working on it and this is what's happened, which is a good reason not to believe other conspiracy theories. But in December of 1974, the New York Times ran a front page story that suggested that this is what they had been doing. They'd been testing drugs and stuff on their own citizens. The result of this was a congressional investigation in 1975. They actually found 20,000 documents of MKUltra that had been misfiled in a financial department, and that's why they had not been destroyed. And in 1977, 74, the New York Times, 75, Congress investigates and finds these papers. And in 77, you've got the Select Committee Senate hearings on MKUltra. So, here we are, proof that this department actually ran. And look at the title here, Project MK, CIA's program of research in behavioral modification, and all of the crazy and completely illegal, completely against the Nuremberg laws that the US had signed up to, about illegally testing this unknowingly on its own citizens in the thousands. In 1994, the CIA actually admitted that thousands of people had been used as test subjects for this drugs program throughout the 1950s and 60s. So it definitely happened. But because the majority of files were destroyed, this obviously leads to all sorts of conspiracy theories. And, you know, there were movies made about them. The Manchurian Candidate, a movie about exactly this. A heroic soldier whose mind is wiped through this drug program by the CIA, and implanted in him is that all of the things he thinks and wants to do, and I think he's set up with a fake wife. It's been a while since I've seen the film, in order for him to be a successful president that the CIA can control. And so it's understandable about why we get all of these weird, crazy things. It's also the basis for the Jason Bourne movies. Jason Bourne is a super soldier product of MK Ultra. That's where the idea comes from in Robert Ludlum's books. So I can understand why MK Ultra is the stuff of conspiracy theories. But much of it is out in the open, and I suppose much of it is still secret, possibly even under another name going on. Who knows? But the project MK Ultra started today, April 13th, 1953, by CIA Director Alan Dulles. And I'm sure the decision that took place today in 1953 has a lot of questions still to answer. Let's move on to our final topic for today, and something a bit lighter, a bit nicer. I want to talk about the greatest ever round of golf that took place. This is a little controversial because you could argue quite well for another candidate. I am going to argue for Tiger Woods. You might say, well, what about Jordan Spieth in 2015? But no, I'm going to say Tiger Woods in 1997 at the US Masters. And you can make your own comparisons with Spieth. I'll try and deal with that as we go along. But Woods, remember, turned pro in August 1996. And only 8 months later won the US Masters. He won with a 12-stroke margin of victory, which is the largest margin of victory in any major tournament, or in the Masters, for the whole of the 20th century, and the second largest in any of the 4 major tournaments ever. The largest was only by one more shot by a man called Tom Morris, who won the British Open in 1862 by 13 shots. So this is a huge, huge victory. Jordan Spieth in 2015 only won by 4 shots, although he shot the same kind of numbered round. Still, that is a massive margin of victory. And it's not the only thing that was broken that day. He also broke the 32-year Jack Nicklaus record for how many for your score for the entire tournament. Jack Nicklaus, 32 years earlier, had won the Masters with 17 shots under par. And in 1997, today, Tiger Woods won with 18 shots under par. Now, I know that Jordan Spieth equaled that, but everybody got much higher scores that day. So I don't know. The point is that Woods did it first, and first does count in my book. So there we are. But not the only thing. He was also the youngest ever golfer to win the US Masters, and that is still the case. He was 5 months younger than Spieth, who won it in 2015. So still the youngest ever, the biggest winning margin, the first person to break the record and get 18 under. I think that on April the 13th, 1997, is the greatest round of golf ever played. And those are our 3 events. That's April the 13th in time. I've got one more nugget for you, because also on April the 13th, asteroid 7373 Takai was discovered and named after the American actor George Takai. I wonder what Commander Sulu would have made of all of that. Who knows? Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. That's the end of our stories today. I'll be back tomorrow for April the 14th. Have a good day and watch that weather outside. Could be another Black Monday. Don't go out. See you later, people. Bye. Yes, I want to stop recording.